All right, thanks everybody for joining us here. I'm Will DuPree, and now for the past hour, our three guests and I have been watching the debate from moment one between Jasmine Crockett and James Talarico, along with all of you at home. And we are here now to provide some expert analysis and reaction to everything we just heard, or just maybe a little bit of it too. So we want to first introduce all of our guests and have some fun this afternoon. So joining us here is Angel Carroll. She is a Democratic political strategist. Luke Warford is the founder of the Agave Democratic Infrastructure Fund. And Andy Hogue is the communications director for the Travis County Republican Party. Angel, Luke, and Andy, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Good to be here.
Okay, we want to start broad for everybody at home. Tell us just your first few thoughts about maybe who even emerged ahead in this particular debate. Go down the line. We'll start with you, Angel.
I mean, look, debates are really hard, and I think everyone is really excited to see both of them side by side. I think this is the only time we may see that happen. I think James did a great job of answering the questions directly and quickly, but I think Jasmine gave that background that a lot of people need to know as they're getting prepared for their vote to see who's going to be the best person to represent their values in Congress.
Okay, Luke, what do you think?
I think one of the biggest questions in the minds of Democratic primary voters is who's going to have the best chance to win in November if they become the Democratic nominee. I think I would have liked to see more, honestly, out of both candidates speaking to that and more questions on electability, because I think it's so top of mind for Texas Democratic primary voters. But I think from an electability standpoint, I think James spoke more directly to his plan to win. We saw that earlier on in the debate, and then they got more into policy and issues later on.
We'll get into electability coming up in just a moment. But Andy, for being the lone Republican here on our panel today, I'm wondering what stood out to you. Is there something from the debate that you think Republicans will jump on and use in campaign ads potentially against one of them?
Yeah, well, I think it's just the same old tax and spend strategy. They talk about affordability, equity, and all that. When it gets right down to it, their solutions was get rid of Donald Trump's tariff increases, which is actually saving us money in this country, or let's increase taxes on billionaires, as if billionaires aren't bankrolling Democrat candidates too. So I think those things will shine to the Republican voters. Okay,
let's focus on that electability question. There have been so many conversations, so many articles, interviews, and the like talking about that issue specifically. What did you think, Angel, about Jasmine Crockett's arguments, particularly about how she might be able to appeal to a broader selection of voters? Because she really has said at some points that maybe the Trump voters who supported the president during 2024 are not really needed to push a Democrat over the finish line. What do you say to that?
I'd say she's not wrong. I think Texas is actually more blue than we think. We just need folks to get excited and to come out to vote, and I think that is her. I really do fear long term, though, what we're telling voters who don't traditionally come out and vote when we're saying a woman of color can't win an election like this. I don't think that that's true, and I think it's quite frankly offensive and hypocritical. When it comes to, again, as we mentioned earlier, electability, both of these candidates talked about people want a fighter. They both agreed on that. And Jasmine spoke to how she's already doing the work and how she is fighting. We've also seen James here locally fight for the community as well. So again, it's who's going to be the best person to do that and who do we trust? One thing that was pointed out to me was James talked about going up against Paxton. There are more than two Republicans in that primary. We don't know who's going to come out of it.
Right.
So my biggest question is he prepared to go against a Wesley Hunt or a John Cornyn?
Yeah, that was notable to me that he specifically name-checked Ken Paxton. Luke, what did you think of that?
So I didn't read too much into that.
Okay.
I think Ken Paxton's probably the most prominent person in the Republican primary. Like he's obviously incredibly well known and a really good boogeyman. So I think from that perspective, it makes sense for whoever the Democratic nominee is to be talking about Ken Paxton. I also think he's sort of this cartoonishly corrupt figure that is a really good juxtaposition or foil for Representative Talarico or for Congresswoman Crockett.
And Andy, because you're the lone Republican on our panel here today, I want to ask you about what you think, because what we didn't see play out today was a debate among the Republicans who are running for this particular primary too. John Cornyn, Ken Paxton, Wesley Hunt, those are the main three players in that race. John Cornyn has said that he believes that this is ultimately going to go to a runoff, which would prolong the primary process for Republicans. Where do you see that state of play at the moment? Who do you think is ahead separately from what the Democrats are doing.
Yeah, well, going back to your previous question, I think that's part of the calculus to go ahead and give Paxton a little more of the spotlight to increase the likelihood of a extended primary season for Republicans and drain our finances just a little bit. But to your question, I think there's a lot of strategy that goes into this, things behind the boardroom and things that deal with current events and the federal scene that we've been hearing about during today's debate. We saw a lot of current events, even events that happened today, come into that. So there's a lot that goes into it, and we just have to really keep our eyes open and look for the trends as they show up. Yeah.
Okay, so Andy's, I think you're touching on some of the upheaval we've seen in Minneapolis regarding
Yes.
ICE enforcement, and
Correct.
we want to play a moment from the debate. I believe we had that clip to talk about that particular portion of the debate. So if we can, let's toss to that, and then we'll get your reactions afterward.
All right, very good.
If elected senator, you will represent all Texans, many of whom support deporting undocumented immigrants. How do you balance your feelings toward ICE versus the Texans you will represent who support the enforcement we're seeing right now? Ms. Crockett, we start with you. You have 30 seconds.
Yeah, as it relates to the enforcement that we see right now, let me be clear. They are supposed to do immigration and customs enforcement, not going after U.S. citizens, not going after people that are documented. That is not what they are supposed to do, but that is what they are doing. They are turning us into Nazi Germany by saying they're going to go door to door. They are going after people because of their accent or the color of their skin, because this Supreme Court gave them carte blanche ability to do so. So all we want ICE to do is to do what ICE was created to do, and unfortunately, that's not what they are doing.
All right, thank you. Mr. Talarico, same question. How do you balance your feelings toward ICE versus the people you would represent who support deporting undocumented immigrants? You have 30 seconds.
So my family is from the border. My mom grew up in Laredo, Texas. I feel like Texans understand this issue of immigration more so than people in other states because we live with it, both the benefits and the challenges. So what I've said is that our southern border should be like our front porch. There should be a giant welcome mat out front and a lock on the door. We can welcome immigrants who want to live the American dream. We can build a pathway to citizenship for those neighbors who have been here, making us richer and stronger, and we can keep out people who mean to do us harm.
So there we have it. Angel, what sticks out to you about their approach to that, and why do you think, based on the polls we've seen, affordability, healthcare, cost of goods, but why does this factor into that calculus that some of the Democratic primary voters are thinking about right now?
Yeah, I mean, we all watch it. I think they're passionate about both. I think Jasmine was a little bit more fiery in that answer, and I think she expressed what everyone is feeling right now. I did notice that neither of them really said abolish ICE, which I think that matters to some folks, and so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
And Luke, what about you?
I mean, I think obviously affordability is top of the list for many Texas voters, but immigration is right up there as well. I think the immigration issue more broadly speaks to what any candidate is going to have to do in the general election. I think they're going to need a plan, and they're going to need to make a case about why they will do better for Texas on immigration in particular. I do think, obviously, the behavior of ICE and the raids and recent violence is incredibly unpopular. I think it's having a huge impact on Texas voters, but Latino voters in particular, with regards to how they feel about their current elected officials. But I do think what we want to see is somebody who has a real plan on immigration.
And Andy, I want to ask you about something that Angel brought up too. That slogan, phrase, abolish ICE. They were even asked that specifically if they would support perhaps abolishing ICE or defunding it. Neither one of them took that and went that far to say that particular thing. What do you think that as a Republican, as you're listening to that, is that perhaps to walk a fine line and avoid potential attacks from your party during the campaign moving forward?
I don't know if it's that, but more of a pragmatism that we need some entity to deport the terrorists and the people that really shouldn't be here, those that were brought in under false pretenses or snuck into the country. Under Joe Biden, we had a record number of illegal border crossings, and we saw them right there on network television just coming across breaking the fence. We saw that with our own eyes. So I think that if you look at the Republican platform, you see that we want to abolish these federal agencies. We want to bring the power back to Congress. But in the meantime, we have a federal problem that was brought to us by the Biden administration, and we're using ICE to roll that thing back. Go to wow.dhs.gov, worst of the worst, and you'll see rapists, you'll see people on terrorist watch lists, you'll see human traffickers that have been rounded up and kicked out of this country. Probably a lot more bad that was taken out of this country thanks to ICE raids than bad that has happened to our own citizens.
I want to zoom out a little bit and talk about the convention that was happening. The debate was playing in front of the Texas AFL-CIO's membership. The members are going to vote tomorrow on who to endorse in so many different races, including the U.S. Senate primary. Both James Talarico and Jasmine Crockett have gotten endorsements from that union throughout their entire political career, and now they're going against each other. So, Angel, whenever you're thinking about that context, I mean, how meaningful would an endorsement from the AFL-CIO be for one of them?
I mean, it's everything, right?
Really?
Yeah, I mean, these are the unions, right? These are the folks that are going to come out and block walk. Excuse me. They also, again, they show up, right? They help run our country. When we think about postal workers, teachers, federal employees, it means a lot. Again, as I mentioned earlier, both of these candidates have similar policies. I think how they get there and their personal experiences differ a little bit. I really look forward to seeing what that decision comes.
Yeah, it'll be so interesting to see what happens, especially because those same people have voted for both of them in different perspectives. And Luke, can you talk about, too, what does a candidate do without that endorsement? Should they move forward? Does that hobble their chances, you think, with Democratic voters?
I mean, I think there's a world where the AFL-CIO endorses both candidates. I think there's, it'll be interesting to see. I'm sure there's conversation happening in the room right now as we speak about who to endorse. And, both candidates have strong records on fighting for the working class. And I think what we've seen is that one of the biggest, stories coming out of 2024 and one of the biggest questions for 2026 is, can Democrats advocate to the working class and help win back some of the working class voters that we lost in 2024? And so I think the endorsement process does really matter. It's are really significant, and it's going to be interesting to see what they decide.
And Andy, what are you looking for with that union vote? I mean, does that carry much weight for the Republicans on your side?
Well, the working class vote definitely carries weight. I mean, not so much the union gatekeepers' decisions, but I want to go back just a little bit to maybe something that's more of our constituency. That's the people of faith. And as someone with a lot in common with James Talarico, lay ministry, I've studied a little bit, and I'm also involved in politics. They asked, hey, that whole love thy neighbor thing, is that enough? Are you going to fight? Well, I want to say that meekness isn't weakness. And the average voter that is probably a person of faith, or at least has a background in that, maybe in their families, they're going to look at that and go, what is this? Of course Christians are in this country. And so I think that's going to be a big constituency too. The unions are important, the working people definitely, but the people of faith can't be ignored either. So.
Yeah, and Angel and Luke, if you would want to jump in on that too, and about how that constituency might play into the 2026 election.
Our country was built on the theory of separation of church and state as a woman of faith. I strongly believe in that. And unfortunately, we are living in a country where that line it's really blurred right now. And so one of the things that I think James is going to have to navigate, right, is not everyone is a Christian, identifies as a Christian. And I think he's done a really good job of speaking about his faith, but also just talking to others who may have different faiths. But I think I'm hearing from a lot of voters that that's a turnoff for them. So okay. I don't know. If we're being honest, I'm hearing different sides of the coin there.
Yeah, very interesting, yeah.
Well, and I think the question a little bit comes down to, are we talking about the impact of that in the primary versus the general? And in the general, I think clearly either candidate is going to, if they want to have a chance to win, try to differentiate themselves from the National Democratic Party and from your typical Democrat, because neither party, Republicans or Democrats, are popular right now. And so I think really they're going to want to say, I'm a different type of Democrat. And for James Talarico, his faith, his Christian identity is clearly a big part of that. And I think when you look at him, not just in Texas, but across the country, I think he's speaking to some of those values and some of those principles maybe more effectively than anyone else in the Democratic Party across the country. So I think that's a clear way in which James is different than your typical Democrat. And it'll be interesting to see if Congresswoman Crockett becomes the nominee, how she goes out and is able to show that she's a different type of Democrat also.
And if I can, I think that's James's strongest strength also when we're thinking about in a general election, pulling moderate Republicans over who are looking at the Republican Party and saying, this is not the party that I have historically supported, and this is not the version of Christianity that I support and live my life by, and the values.
Yeah.
And Andy, if you wanted to address that too, I mean, do
Yeah.
you feel that there are Republicans that you're worried about losing some of those potentially softer Trump voters that maybe flipped from Joe Biden to President Trump in 2024? I mean, what are you looking at?
I mean, fair point. You know, it is a midterm. President Trump does have his enemies. We do have the Tom Masseys, the Tom Tillises, and Chip Roy to some degree. I think Trump has rubbed everybody the wrong way. But, you know, like with, Ted Cruz, he was once Lion Ted, so allegiances change. But I will have to say in regard to that, yeah, Trump got to where he was because he was an outside-the-box thinker. You know, he was almost like the Ron Paul phenomenon. No one saw him coming out of nowhere and becoming a major player in the debates back in 2012 and 2008. So I think Americans like come from behind stories. I think they like the Ross Perot's. They like Jasmine Crockett, especially, who's shown tonight. I think she really came out swinging. She gets a lot of the sound bites. People think she's a radical, but she came out tonight with some sound policies. So I think she's really going to look a little different tonight. But I think people like these outside-the-box thinkers that think for themselves, aren't married to a party. And I'm saying that as a party guy myself, but
Sure.
Think for themselves and apply some. We're electing a person, not a party, and they like that. They like to see that strength. They like to see, hey, this person's out for me and not just the machine.
And Andy, I've been wanting to ask a Republican this particularly, so bear with me a
Lay
little
it
bit.
on me, man.
Whenever you're talking to, your friends, your fellow party leaders here in Travis County, is there a particular Democrat that you would prefer to see end up winning the primary and going on to November to face whoever the Republicans nominate?
Oh, we were talking earlier about Colin Allred. I kind of liked his style.
Okay.
And of course,
well, he's not on the picture.
Not an option.
well, there have been like the Zell Millers back in the day, dating myself a little bit. We're having the March for Life today. There's a lot of just 1,000 or more pro-lifers standing out in the sleet and
Yeah, and
snow
Governor
right now.
Abbott spoke at that as well.
Absolutely, big deal for today. But so unless the Democrats change their tone on some of those key issues, I don't see things shifting too much. But as far as I'm concerned, I used to like some of the old school Southern Democrats. I think if I were born maybe 2 years earlier, I would have been a Democrat for a couple of years before my home county shifted. But that's the way it happened. The Southern Democrats all went Republican in the mid 90s, and we've been there ever since. But I kind of miss the old practical Democrats. But right now, we're the Republicans, and hey, maybe that's why I'm a Republican.
Okay, so you're not giving me a choice, though.
Well, I can't think of any Democrats I really would vote for lately. I haven't voted for a Democrat in over 30 years, so maybe that's the reason why our parties have become so divergent. There used to be a lot more of a Venn diagram agreement. There used to be a Sarah Davis over here, and a moderate Democrat way over here. They would cross sometimes. We used to have Eddie Lucio Jr. anyway, who would vote pro-life and vote for Governor Abbott's agenda. But things have changed a whole lot. The parties have become more polarized, and we'll see if the voters of the future will appreciate that polarity, or if they'll go more toward a moderate, pragmatic direction.
Yeah, and Luke and Angel, I want to ask you too about the Republican primary, since I got Andy's thoughts about that as well. We heard James Talarico specifically name check Ken Paxton. All the polls show that Ken Paxton and John Cornyn in particular are so close, maybe within just a point of each other, and not enough to avoid a runoff. So when you're looking down the line to November, is there a particular candidate that you think this might be a better way to defeat a Democrat and defeat a Republican and elect a Democrat statewide for the first time in more than 30 years?
I'll let you go first.
Well, I think there's this general assumption that Ken Paxton is a weaker general election candidate than John Cornyn, and for sure that makes sense. He's cartoonishly corrupt, twice indicted, once impeached by his own party. It would certainly be an opportunity for Texas Democrats to be running against Ken Paxton. But I think people underestimate just how unpopular John Cornyn is, right? His unfavorability, when you look at polling, is actually even worse than Ken Paxton's, which I think is really meaningful. And I don't think Republican voters in particular are going to be as excited to vote for somebody who's kind of wavered on their support for Trump and wavered on their commitment to the basic ideals of the party. So I actually do think that they're both really weak candidates. And in the context of an election year, when you've got Donald Trump in the White House, people are frustrated at the economy, they're frustrated at the Republicans. I do think that is the foundation of, okay, if the Democrats can put up a really strong general election candidate, then maybe they have a chance this year.
Yeah, Angel, what are your thoughts about who the Republicans might end up nominating? Are you hoping to see somebody else over another?
I mean, they're both terrible, as Luke said. I think, if I had to pick someone, I'm going to be that one person that gives you a name. I'd say Paxton, but I mean, to be honest, when I look at the last couple elections, Republican voters have proven time and time again that polarizing topics that I think cause concern for most people, they don't care about. Yeah. And so I'm really not sure. I think at the end of the day, Democratic voters, though, once we get past this primary, we need to have our feelings and then get it together and make sure that we all show up for who our nominee is, because we can flip this seat, but we all have to rally together and make sure it happens.
I wanted to bring the three of you into this conversation today because all three of you have run for office very recently. And Luke, and Luke, you ran statewide for Railroad Commission back in 2022. Yeah. To be able to do that, to ask for the entire state to vote for you, I mean, you need a lot of name recognition so that people feel familiar with you. Can you talk about what these candidates are having to face, both Jasmine Crockett and James Talarico, in that regard?
So I think two of the most important things in order to be able to run an effective statewide campaign, especially in 2026, are your ability to get attention and your ability to fundraise. And the thing that we have with both Congresswoman Crockett and Representative Talarico is we've got two of the best people in the Democratic Party, not just in Texas, but across the country, at getting attention online, especially with younger voters, and at fundraising. And so I think from that perspective, both could be really strong general election candidates. I think the question is a little bit more about, and for Democratic primary voters, about their respective theories about how they're going to win. And I think, we've talked about Democrats have not won statewide in 30 years. And so the question is, if you get all of that attention and you raise all that money, what kind of strategy are you implementing there? And I think really clearly we need to excite the base and also be persuading and convincing independents, disaffected Republicans to come over and vote for Democrats. I think given how long it's been since a Democratic victory, it's just very clear that the Democratic nominee is going to have to do that.
Yeah, Angel, what do you think is different particularly about this year compared to years past when Democrats have lost statewide?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's different is Democrats are tired of losing, and we're seeing it hitting our pocketbooks, we're seeing it hitting our schools, and I think folks are really tired of being tired, and the base is coming out. Look, there are 45, I think a recent study, 45% of voters are independent, but they lean more Democratic. And so our party is going to have to excite those people, and I think we're getting there. It doesn't hurt, unfortunately, that we have the murdering of citizens at the hands of ICE. And we're feeling it when we go to the grocery store and see how much it costs to fill up our tanks. The Republicans are going to have to answer for this, and I think the midterms, this is the time.
Yeah. Andy, what are your thoughts about all of that, too, if you wanted to add them?
The gas up in God's country in Leander was $1.98. We're doing pretty good. But on top of that, I would have to say that the majority of voters, especially in Leander and some of the suburbs, they're good government voters. They're not so much conservative, liberal, progressive, or populist. They just want good government. And Leander, it's hard to beat an incumbent because the city's being run well. If the city's not being run well, it's hard to be an incumbent. So I think the Democrats have a disadvantage by having not been in power for a long time. Republicans have a disadvantage as, we're in charge, what have we done, But again, you have to raise the funds, you got to please the base, you got to have people knocking the doors and being excited for you. You don't want to bore your base. Right. But at the same time, there's a great majority of voters who really, they'll go one way or the other. They'll vote for a Democrat and Republican, they'll swing back and forth. And you've got to convince them you have good government in mind, you've got their best interests in mind, and that's where a good communications program comes in. And man, we all fight that battle on a daily basis, so thank you for reminding me how important that is for both our parties. Yeah.
Do you think those good government voters will vote for Ken Paxton?
I don't know. That's interesting. They have before. And the Republican voters I've spoken to, they like Ken Paxton. They're not voting for homecoming king. They're not voting for Mr. Congeniality. They're voting for Attorney General. Now they're going to be voting for Senator. They want somebody that's going to represent their values. He's going to fight for us. Not just fight for the Republican Party, not fight for the Democrats, but he's going to fight for me. And Ken has proven that time and time again.
Well, I want to play another moment from the debate. If you all are just joining us, we appreciate you sticking with us for this post-show from the Democratic primary debate for U.S. Senate. We want to play a moment, though, them talking about health care and the Affordable Care Act. So if we have that cue up, let's play it now.
Well, I believe health care is a human right that shouldn't depend on how much money you make or what zip code you're born into. This is personal for me. I was 28 when I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. My first 30-day supply of insulin cost me $684. I couldn't afford that, so I put it on a credit card. That's because Big Pharma has a chokehold on the healthcare system in this country. They have a monopoly on the insulin market. So when I got elected, I took on Big Pharma and their lobbyists, and we passed a $25 insulin copay cap. And then I passed a Bernie Sanders idea through the Texas legislature to import cheaper prescription drugs from Canada right here into Texas. That's the kind of bold leadership we need at the federal level. We have to reverse all the cuts made to the Affordable Care Act, and we have to allow every Texan and every American the chance to join Medicare. I think universal coverage should be a non-negotiable in the wealthiest country in human history.
Ms. Crockett, same question. What do you see as a fix or alternative to the Affordable Care Act? You have 60 seconds.
Yeah, so I am a proud sponsor of Medicare for All. I signed on to Medicare for All my first term. I'm currently a sponsor of it. I also signed on to a bill that Lloyd Doggett has. It's called the Care Now Act. And what this would do is force a state like Texas to end up expanding Medicaid. We know that in the state of Texas, we lead in uninsured in this country with over 5 million uninsured. What we've not talked about enough is how many Texans are actually on the Affordable Care Act and how they are impacted by these tax subsidies that were rolled back or allowed to expire in January. I was proud to say that while the Democrats are in the minority, we were able to go ahead and force through a vote in the House on extending those tax subsidies for 3 years. But that's basically a Band-Aid. And frankly, we were able to get that out of the House, but we are still waiting on the Senate to act. I think that this is about making sure that people understand that they want us to be pitted against one another. They want us to believe that there's not enough money to do it all. But the reality is that our budget is about our priorities. We have a multi-trillion-dollar budget. And so if we truly believe that everyone should have access to health care, we can make that a reality with bold leadership.
And that again was from the debate that just happened about 30 minutes ago. For all of you, I want you to answer this. So how important do you think it will be for any candidate, Democratic or Republican, to talk about the cost of health care, the cost of goods, housing, those kinds of issues? Because we saw that play out during the debate tonight among all the different things that were discussed. But what about those particular things? What do you expect that to look like moving forward?
You mean the issues that matter to working class Texans?
Yeah.
I think it's going to fare very well for them. And I love that James talked about healthcare is a human right. We need folks that are going to be able to talk to that and speak to that. Now more than ever, people are feeling that if you can't afford your medication and life or death, that matters.
Yeah. How critical is that, Luke?
I mean, I think affordability, we've seen it obviously across the country and here in Texas is the top issue for voters. And I really appreciated seeing both Congresswoman Crockett and Representative Talarico get specific on what they mean by affordability, right? I think we talk about affordability as this sort of broad, amorphous term sometimes, but what are we really talking about, right? We're talking about the price of eggs, we're talking about the price of milk, we're talking about the price of healthcare. You see healthcare premiums going up for people who are on the Affordable Care Act and who across the country. And I think that is going to be an incredibly salient issue for Democrats in Texas this election cycle. Healthcare, unlike immigration, is an issue that voters actually trust Democrats more on. And so I think it's an opportunity for whoever becomes the Democratic nominee to lay out a clear vision of what they want to do to reform the ACA and move the country and our healthcare system forward.
And Andy, what about the Republican approach to talking about those kinds of issues, lowering costs of things?
Well, first of all, it was the Republican Party that lowered the cost of insulin. We saw this dust up with Talarico's last campaign ad where he said, reduced the cost when he corrected himself today and he said we. So I was glad to see that he corrected himself. But Republicans can take a stand on the free market. Before the government got involved in our health care, hospitals were not for-profit institutions. They were nonprofits. They were charitable institutions. Doctors made house calls. And somehow we went from that 50 years ago to later, mortgaging our own bodies. How did that happen? How did the cost of my family's health care go above my home mortgage? I don't know all the answers. It's a very complicated tapestry. But if you look at health care places that do not take insurance, now that's going to be out of pocket even for a lot of people, but we're looking at a 1/10 of the cost. The volume cost of healthcare as it is so abnormally huge, the average person couldn't afford it out of pocket. So we've got to get back to something more market focused. Republicans can take the lead on that, but we just haven't communicated that well because frankly, you start saying free market and everybody starts crystallizing, I don't understand the market, right? But I think that's the answer, to get the government out, start over from square one and build something better. Maybe get out of this notion of a system and go back to a healthcare market.
I think Congressman Crockett mentioned something that's really important, right? We have the budget to do this. And so 2 legislative sessions ago, Representative Talarico did introduce a bill, right, talking about lowering the cost of insulin, and that did get passed through.
Yes, it did, yeah.
It did, and I think it's also important to mention that Texas could have Texas could have accepted the funds to expand Medicare, but we chose not to, and that was because of Republican leadership. And so I think voters need to think about that when going into the general as well. Which party has consistently shown up to ensure that all Texans have affordable health care and can afford their medication?
Well, we are coming up on 30 minutes doing this, and I appreciate you all sticking around, especially on this cold day. I know you've got other things to worry about with your houses and everything, so we want to say thank you for joining us to talk about this. There are, of course, many more conversations to come, including tomorrow when the AFL-CIO will vote on an endorsement between James Talarico and Jasmine Crockett, so we'll be watching that closely. And you can see all of our coverage of the ongoing debate on our website, KXAN.com. But Angel Carroll, Luke Warford, Andy Hogue, thank you so much for being here and making the time to talk about this.
Thanks for having us.
It was worthwhile, thank you.
We are going to send you all on your way. Thank you again so much for being here with us for ongoing coverage of the Democratic primary debate for U.S. Senate. I'm Will DuPree. Thanks again for watching, and stay safe and warm and informed out there.